The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the kind of place where the grass was measured in millimeters and the silence was guarded like a state secret. It was a sea of beige siding and perfectly manicured hedges, governed by a homeowners association that operated with the intensity of a small military junta. Elara Vance didn't mind the quiet. In fact, after 12-hour shifts dealing with the chaos of the county, the silence of Willow Creek was the only thing keeping her sane. She had moved in 6 months ago, a reward to herself after 20 years of climbing the ranks to become the first black woman elected as the county sheriff. She kept a low profile. When she wasn't in uniform, she was just a woman in joggers and a faded college hoodie who enjoyed gardening. She never parked her cruiser in the driveway, it stayed in the garage, and she rarely talked shop with the neighbors. To the Willow Creek Enforcement Committee, she was simply the new element in House 42. The knock at the door. It started on a Tuesday morning. Elara was off duty, enjoying a rare cup of coffee on her porch. A black SUV pulled up to the curb and 3 people stepped out. They wore navy blue windbreakers with HOA inspection printed in bold white letters across the back. At the head of the group was Arthur Sterling, a man whose personality was as stiff as his starched khakis. Beside him were Linda and Marcus, 2 residents who seemed to derive a dark pleasure from measuring the height of trash cans. "Morning," Elara called out, leaning against her porch railing. "Can I help you with something?" Arthur didn't smile, he held a clipboard like a shield. "Ms. Vance, we're here regarding several outstanding violations on this property. We've sent notices." "I received one notice about a non-compliant rose bush," Elara said calmly, "which I trimmed yesterday." "It's more than the roses now," Linda chimed in, her eyes darting toward Elara's front door. "We've had reports of unauthorized tactical equipment being moved into the garage. And then there's the matter of the security threat you pose to the community's aesthetic and safety." Elara frowned. "Security threat? I'm a resident, I pay my dues." "We've decided to escalate," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a tone of practiced authority. "Willow Creek has a safety and harmony clause. We have the right to detain and remove individuals who refuse to comply with community standards until local law enforcement arrives to process the trespass." Elara blinked, nearly splashing her coffee. "Detain? Arthur, you're an HOA president, not a magistrate. You can't arrest people for having a messy garage." "We aren't just the HOA," Marcus said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pair of heavy-duty plastic zip ties. "We are the neighborhood patrol, and we've voted. You're an undesirable presence, Ms. Vance. We're here to escort you off the premises and hold you for the authorities." The escalation. The absurdity of the situation hit Elara first, followed closely by a cold, sharp anger. She realized they weren't just being annoying neighbors, they were playing a very dangerous game of vigilante. "Step off my porch," Elara said, her voice dropping an octave. The relaxed neighbor persona vanished, replaced by the steel of a woman who had stared down cartel leaders and crooked politicians. "Don't resist, dear," Linda said, reaching for Elara's arm. "It only makes the paperwork harder." Elara stepped back, avoiding the touch. "You are on private property. You are threatening a citizen. This is your one and only warning to turn around, get in your SUV and go back to measuring grass." Arthur puffed out his chest. He was used to intimidating elderly retirees and single mothers. He didn't recognize the look in Elara's eyes, the look of a predator watching a prey animal make a fatal mistake. "Marcus, restrain her," Arthur ordered. As Marcus stepped forward, reaching for Elara's wrists with the zip ties, Elara moved with a fluid, practiced speed. She didn't strike him, but she pivoted, caught his forearm, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling into the porch swing. "That's assault," Linda shrieked, fumbling for her phone. "I'm calling the police. We'll have you in a cell by noon." "Please," Elara said, crossing her arms. "Call them. Tell them you need a supervisor at House 42. In fact, tell them to send the chief deputy." The arrival of the law. Arthur was red-faced, screaming into his own phone about aggressive squatters and violent resistance. He truly believed he was the hero of this story. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, blocking Elara's path as if he were guarding a fortress. "You think you're so tough?" Arthur sneered. "Wait until the real law gets here. They don't take kindly to people like you causing trouble in neighborhoods like this." People like me, Alara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You know what I mean, Arthur spat. You don't fit the profile, you're a disruption. 10 minutes later, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not just one siren, but a chorus of them. 3 marked sheriff's department cruisers roared around the corner, their lights splashing blue and red against the beige houses. They screeched to a halt, blocking the HOA's SUV. Arthur turned, a triumphant grin on his face. Finally, officers, over here, this woman assaulted a member of the patrol and is refusing to vacate a non-compliant property. Chief Deputy Miller, a mountain of a man with 25 years on the force, stepped out of the lead car. He didn't look at Arthur, he didn't look at the inspectors. His eyes went straight to the woman on the porch. Sheriff Miller said, tipped his hat, everything okay here? The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it might crack the pavement. Arthur's clipboard slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the driveway. Linda's jaw dropped so low it looked painful. Marcus, still tangled in the porch swing, froze. Sheriff, Arthur whispered, the color draining from his face until he was the same shade as his khakis. The table turns. Alara stepped down from the porch, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked right up to Arthur, who seemed to be trying to shrink into his own shoes. Arthur, I'd like you to meet Chief Deputy Miller, Alara said, her voice echoing in the quiet street. Miller, Mr. Sterling here was just attempting to arrest me. He and his friends brought zip ties and everything. They called it an escort off the premises. Miller's expression went from professional to grim. He looked at the plastic ties in Marcus's hand. Attempting to detain a citizen without cause, that's false imprisonment. Attempting to do it to the high-ranking elected official of this county, that's a whole different level of stupid, son. We didn't know, Linda stammered, her voice high and thin. We thought, you never said you don't have a car with a logo. And you're always just in those clothes. I didn't realize I needed to wear my stars to be treated with basic human rights in my own yard, Alara said. She turned to Miller. Check their SUV, I want to see if they've got any other tactical equipment they've been using to harass the neighbors. And Marcus, you're going to need to step out of that swing. You're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and assault. Kidnapping, Marcus cried. We were just enforcing the bylaws. The bylaws of Willow Creek do not supersede the Constitution of the United States, Alara said firmly. And they certainly don't give you the right to put hands on a woman because you don't like her aesthetic. The reckoning. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity that Willow Creek would talk about for decades. The inspectors were handcuffed, real metal handcuffs, not plastic ties, and sat on the curb. Neighbors began to peek out of their windows. Some even stepped onto their lawns, watching as the 3 most feared members of the HOA were loaded into the back of sheriff's cruisers. Alara stood with Miller near the black SUV. They've been doing this for a while, Miller. Look at these files in the back. They've been investigating every minority family and single renter in the zip code. We'll take it all into evidence, Sheriff, Miller said. Harassment, stalking, impersonating an officer, we can make a lot of this stick. You want to press charges personally. Alara looked at Arthur, who was weeping silently in the back of the patrol car. He looked small. He looked like the bully he had always been, stripped of his clipboard and his imaginary power. I want the law followed to the letter, Alara said. No favors, no shortcuts, just like they would have done to me if I hadn't been who I am. As the cars began to pull away, Alara's next-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, walked over. She had always been kind to Alara, often swapping gardening tips over the fence. I had no idea you were the sheriff, Alara, Mrs. Gable said, a twinkle in her eye. But I did know you were too much woman for those 3 to handle. Alara laughed, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. I just wanted to grow some roses, Mrs. Gable. Well, the older woman said, looking at the empty street where the inspectors had been. I think the neighborhood is going to be a lot more beautiful from now on, regardless of the height of the grass. The new normal. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek underwent a transformation. The HOA board was dissolved and replaced by residents who were more interested in block parties than flower pot violations. Alara didn't hide anymore. She started parking her cruiser in the driveway. She found that the sight of the star on the door didn't ruin the harmony of the neighborhood, it reinforced it. People stopped by to ask for advice or just to say hello. She remained the sheriff, a job that required her to face the worst of humanity every day. But when she came home, she no longer felt like an outsider in her own sanctuary. One Saturday, while she was out front painting her mailbox a vibrant, non-compliant shade of blue, a new family moved in down the street. They looked nervous, eyeing the pristine lawns and the quiet houses with the same hesitation Alara once had. Alara wiped her hands on a rag and walked down the sidewalk. She wasn't wearing her uniform, but she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Alara said with a warm smile. "I'm Alara, I live in 42. The young father looked at her, then at the sheriff's cruiser in her driveway. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. "It's a pleasure to meet you, is it? Is it a good place to live?" Alara looked back at her home, at the blue mailbox, and at the neighborhood that had finally learned the difference between order and justice. "It is now," she said. The inspectors had come to arrest a woman they thought was powerless, unaware that they were stepping into the jurisdiction of a woman who defined power. In trying to enforce their narrow world, they had accidentally set the neighborhood free, and Alara Vance, sheriff and neighbor, was finally home. The title of inspector was never used in Willow Creek again. Instead, people just called each other by their names. It was a simple change, but to Alara it was the greatest victory of her career.